Hi, everyone. It's the Ego Project, and I am Lisa Heidle, and I'm here with
Cristine Seidell.
and we are here with
Joy Malek.
we're so excited. Joy, thank you for joining us. We are going to be delving deeply into INFJs today. And full disclosure, transparency here, we are all INFJs. And which is very exciting. Okay, so let's hit the road. I'm so excited. Okay, here we go. Okay, let me introduce a little bit about Joy. So Joy Malek is a licensed psychotherapist, life coach, educator, and thought leader. Her goal is to contribute to the creation of a world in which everyone has what they need. And if that is not INFJ, I don't know what is. Okay. So Joy weaves together attachment science, Jungian psychology, and personality theory to teach how to craft lives that people, so they can take care of themselves, how they can develop emotionally secure relationships of mutual care, reciprocity people, and how INFJs and highly sensitive people can develop self-understanding, self-compassion, and the skill to use their strengths to address their struggles. So excited, Joy. I'm going to let you add any more information there that you think is relevant to our conversation today.
Thank you. And I'm just thrilled to be here. Thank you, Lisa and Cristine, for inviting me. I think that pretty much encapsulates what I'm trying to do with my work in the world. I started out as a licensed therapist. I've been in the mental health counseling field for 25 years this fall, it'll be. And several years ago, I decided that I wanted to be able to continue, the really rich and meaningful work of being a therapist, but also add in pathways to be able to reach more people, particularly highly sensitive people. And being an INFJ, I niched down into working with INFJs. And now I'm on the cusp of going in some new directions, as well as my work with INFJs.
Very cool. Yeah.
Quick question. Now, you mentioned highly sensitive people and INFJs in the same sentence. And I'm very curious about that overlap that you see. Can you kind of explain that to our listeners?
Absolutely. The truth is, I've never worked with an INFJ who did not also identify as highly sensitive once they learned what that means. I have heard from INFJs on social media who respond to my post comments. Here and there, every once in a while, someone will say, I don't think I'm highly sensitive. And so I respect that. I respect the fact that I may be wrong, that all INFJs are highly sensitive. But at the same time, I think there's not as much information out there about the ways that high sensitivity shows up physically and in a sensory way. A lot of the information out there focuses on high sensitivity when it comes to emotions. And so there are different domains of high sensitivity, and not everyone hits each domain. So one of the things that I like to do is provide education about high sensitivity so that people can, and INFJs can find themselves there if it matches up.
Yeah, I love that, especially because I think highly sensitivity has been kind of related mostly to looking at it in childhood, from a behavioral perspective. So really focusing and helping people in adulthood identify with the clusters of that sensitivity and where they can fall in those facets helps them, I think, make sense of it, and it kind of encourages them to delve into those sensitivities as well and see what little nuggets are in there. So I love that you do that with adulthood specifically. So
thank you. Thank you. I will also add that the reason I use both terms, INFJ and highly sensitive people, is because while I think most INFJs are highly sensitive, certainly there are a lot of other personality types that are highly sensitive as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely. Now, I made the assumption that everyone who's watching or listening knows what INFJ means. Which probably could be the case, not gonna lie to you. But because we are very curious about this type, and that's how I always know if someone's a real INFJ is because usually they'll be like, do you know your type? Or if you ask them, they know their type. So other people are like, I don't know. It's like A, B, C, D. I don't know. I'm like, oh, then you're not an INFJ because we all know our type. So can you, just through your own Jungian lens, kind of give our listeners an idea of what INFJ actually means?
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to. So I'll say first that the MBTI is based on an original theory of personality by Carl Jung, and he called that psychological types. And the MBTI did two things with Jung's original theory. Number one, they organized it into the four-letter codes that we know of today. And number two, it took what was a very nuanced system that Jung originally conceived of and simplified it and made it more binary. So you're either intuitive or sensing, you're either a thinker or a feeler, and so on. Jung's theory actually, what he did was he went into the building blocks of personality or psychological type. And he created what we now know of as the cognitive functions, which are mental processes that each type uses. And so when we put together Jung's more nuanced theory with the organization of the Myers-Briggs, we find that each personality type uses the same four mental processes, which are intuition, sensing, feeling, and thinking, but in a different order. And also, Jung took those four original building blocks of personality and then created two versions of each, an introverted version and an extroverted version. So we have introverted intuition, introverted feeling, extroverted feeling. And so we wind up with eight building blocks of personality type. And each personality type uses four of those eight primarily. So the way that I like to describe INFJs is just to briefly touch on our cognitive functions or mental processes. So number one, our dominant core strength that we are the most skilled at and have the highest preference for using is called introverted intuition. And that's a process whereby we recognize patterns and make connections between intangible things. So often we, in particular, like to focus on emotions, people, relationships, ideas, abstract things that you can't like touch or engage with on a sensory level. And we do that work of finding patterns and making connections inside through reflection. So often we'll find that we are not as quick to be able to pattern recognize in the moment, but afterwards we're post-processors. So afterwards we'll do a lot of reflection and processing, and then the insights will rise to the surface about the dynamics of whatever we experienced. Our second strength, our second cognitive function is extroverted feeling, and that is where we have a gift for focusing on the feelings and needs of others and tending to those. Next, third, we've got introverted thinking. So this is, again, it's not a binary system. Introverted feeling, INFJs also have a thinking function, and introverted thinking in particular is a process that uses logic to develop logical consistency in our thinking. So we want to make sure that all of our thoughts are lined up and aligned, and there aren't logical inconsistencies. And then lastly, the cognitive function that we have the least conscious access to is extroverted sensing. And extroverted sensing is all about action over reflection. It's all about, let's just, let's get up and go, let's experience the world through our five or more physical senses. And we don't really need to think a lot about the whys or the hows. We just sort of attack a problem until we find something that sticks.
Yeah.
Boy, that last one, I'm feeling that.
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean you don't need to know the why and the how?
Exactly.
In that language.
Right. Right.
Oh, that's such a good explanation.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
so for an INFJ and, the INFJs out there listening, really giving yourself permission to say, yes, I'm highly intuitive.
Mhm,
Yeah.
I
mhm.
just am. I
Yeah.
don't know why. I've always been like this. I
Yes.
don't know what it means sometimes, right?
Yes.
And
Mhm.
kind of explore that. So, can you speak a little bit through working with INFJs, how these, our cognitive functions, how they show themselves, and then maybe share a little bit of the limitations
Mm.
or the challenge. I'd say challenges,
Mhm.
not limitations, challenges INFJs run into.
Absolutely. So, most INFJs have an experience of our extroverted feeling, that part of us that tends to others, focuses on what other people are feeling and what other people need over what we feel and what we need.
Mhm.
Um, that carries us into, typically INFJs have a lot of people who enjoy being with us and making use of our ability to be present and caring
Mhm.
um, and help other people with their problems. But because our dominant function is introverted intuition, we are overall introverts. And so that extroverted feeling sort of reflex to try to help people can get us into living lives that are much more extroverted than we actually have the capacity for.
Mhm.
And so INFJs, until we learn how to balance the two, we often find ourselves in a pattern in life where we're living more extrovertedly than we really have energy for, but there's such a payoff in people wanting us, needing us, that really yummy sense of connection we can get with others, until the lack of reciprocity
Mhm.
starts to really wear on us and that extroverted living starts to really wear on us. And so there's a concept called the INFJ door slam, which I think often occurs right about here, where we don't know how to set boundaries. We don't know how to let people know that we have needs that are in opposition to what they want from us. We have needs for solitude. We have needs for reflection, for time, unstructured time where we can be in that dominant introverted intuition function and just process and let our thoughts go in undirected ways to make sense of our experiences and gain insight and settle back into ourselves. So we'll wind up often, making sort of an abrupt U-turn from that connection with others into solitude, and it can be pretty extreme, those two poles.
Yeah.
Um, and then other people are kind of left going, where did they go? What's going, wait, and they
Yeah.
can feel rejected, they can feel let down, which just can add to our resentment because we're people too, and why don't others get that?
Yeah.
Um, so the way of being for INFJs, um, our top need, I would say, is that time for solitude, time to connect inwardly instead of connecting outwardly.
Mhm.
Um, and when we get that, things kind of hum along in a much more resonant and sustainable way for us.
Mhm.
But I think because INFJs use as our dominant function that introverted intuition, happens to be the rarest cognitive function in the stack. So most people don't understand that need
Mhm.
for really marked solitude. They don't understand that, we're so like friendly and we can be so outgoing. They don't get that need to be away
Mhm.
from people, to sort of leave the village and go into the wilderness within.
Mhm.
Um, and so we INFJs can wind up feeling, I think, very misunderstood. And like there others don't necessarily recognize the validity, the legitimacy of that primary need. And so until we can decide that it is 100% valid and legitimate, and set boundaries and educate people about our needs, we can find ourselves in that dilemma, swinging from a life that's too extroverted to a life that kind of shuts everybody else out.
Wow, that's hitting home right now.
Wow. Yes, it is.
Yeah. And I think that, I think that's a misunderstanding with a lot of people that, have access, to that type, is that, they can appear very extroverted because they are in that space of wanting to attend and tune into others. And they oftentimes have the energy because that does energize them to be in that intuitive space with people. And so their energy can kind of be like taken, right? Like, just, I feel like, Lisa and I were just talking about, when you have that giftedness, it feels so good to other people, but you do forget to attend and tune back into yourself. Am I sensing somebody else's feelings, or I need to check in with my own? And that solitude, again, this is a conversation we talk about all the time in the Ego Project, for every type, but especially this type, the need for withdrawal, so that you can clear yourself out and get very grounded in what your feelings are, what are your needs, because it feels so good to everybody else. But that doesn't mean, I think people think TJs our FJs are just so like introverted, they don't understand that they can come off very extroverted. So when they do, they're like, oh, they don't need that alone time, they're an extrovert, really, but it's because it feels so good to get that intuitive energy from them. So I think I feel so validated right now.
So safe, right?
I know. Yeah. Just my identity just kind of like, I felt that imprinting. So what a beautiful way of kind of just really seeing that type, and really, giving them that space to have space to recognize their own needs, because I can definitely see that's a challenge for them, because of that intuition that feels so good to give, but also for other people to receive. That receiving back is definitely something that I think is a challenge for this type.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
I'm tearing up. I'm feeling it so strongly right now, because one, as Cristine said, very seen, very understood, and also the recognition that feeling that I have, that to me, it feels, when I have too many people pulling at my energy, I actually feel it physically.
Yes.
And I don't think people understand that, when, they're asking one favor, but we have 12 people asking from us, and it feels like they're just like attaching into the body and pulling on the energy. And I'm going to ask the two of you as INFJs, is that something that you two, I'm an empath, I'm very empathic, so is that something you two feel as well, the physical sensation?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay, yeah, so thank you for validating, as Cristine said, everything that is like, yeah, I do need it. I do need that alone time. So
and I want to say, Lisa, think it's so lovely that you brought in the somatic physical piece. I find that because we INFJs use extroverted feeling, where our attention is directed toward other people's feelings and needs, and it can be harder to be aware of our own feelings and needs until we've become so deprived that they sort of roar up and take over. Learning to identify those physical sensations when we find ourselves stretched, pulled, overextended, being able to bring our awareness to what does this feel like in my body can actually be a route to understanding our feelings and our needs before they become so ravenous that, you know, they take over everything.
Yeah.
So what I would recommend for any INFJ out there would be, when you are feeling that pull, that overextension, notice, you know, what body sensations am I experiencing? What do I feel in my throat, in my chest, in my abdomen, in my musculature? Am I tense? Am I open? And begin to check in with your body on a more regular basis so that you can catch those signals earlier on and tend to yourself.
Which is so part of what an INFJ does, is recognizes patterns, right? But doing it for self and being like, oh, I know when I start feeling that tight feeling in my chest when I go to open my email or my text messages, right? Like, I know that's mine, but that's that tracking that pattern and really intuitively knowing, this is a pattern that when it shows up, I know what that means. But again, it's so natural to do it for others, but to really be intentional about doing it for self.
Exactly.
So, sorry, Lisa.
No, we're good. I think it's so important as well to not judge what you're feeling. I think very often we're like, well, I've had a day to myself. I shouldn't be feeling this, or I should be able to say yes because, you know, I haven't seen anyone for 3 days, you know, an actual human, you know, and we start to judge that. And so how much of the extroverted sensing in the cognitive sex, and that's our least right, recognized and accessible function, how much of that plays into the boundary setting with ourselves where other people are concerned?
Oh, that's interesting. Let me think about that for a minute. Our impulsivity, I would say, is mainly located in our extroverted sensing. So when we find ourselves kind of, you know, we've just had it up to here, we have nothing left to give, and then there's that door slam, I have a feeling extroverted sensing might be involved.
It's activated.
Right. The cognitive function I go to for boundary setting is actually extroverted feeling, believe it or not. Because even though it's pointed toward others, there's this little hack we can use with it to be able to tend to our own needs. So extroverted feeling wants everyone's feelings and needs to be tended to. You see that for ENFJs who use extroverted feeling as their top dominant cognitive function. They're often able to juggle a lot of different people and a lot of different needs, because the goal is everyone's needs get met, everyone's feelings get tended to, and everyone's feelings and needs have a seat at the table. So the hack is what I call othering the self. So thinking about oneself as one of the people at that table whose feelings and needs need to be tended to as well. You know, I don't know that, I mean, I think there are periods of time, I think there are moments for INFJs where we really do need to prioritize our needs above everyone else. Actually, let me say areas where we need to prioritize our needs above everything else. For me, that includes, I need introverted intuition time every day. I need solitude every day. It's not going to be all day every day, but I need it every day. I need time, that unstructured time, to just flow with my thoughts and intuition and processing. But if we can, you know, if we're looking at a dilemma where someone wants something from us, or there's a need that we genuinely want to meet in someone else, or feelings that someone else has that we genuinely want to tend to, but we also have our own needs that are in opposition to that, then we imagine the table and we imagine ourselves having a seat at the table, and we say, okay, maybe not everyone's needs are going to get met perfectly here, but how can I make sure that as far as my sphere of influence is concerned, how can I make sure that I am prioritizing my own needs as well as everybody else's at this table?
Wow. I love that. Almost like externalizing yourself in that moment,
Exactly.
to really be able to connect, because your automatic go-to is to not. So I love that. And I love that you say, and it not be done perfectly, but just in the sphere that I'm able to show up and the capacity that I have, how can I do, including my. So very cool. I love that. I wrote that down because I want to use that with clients.
Good. I can give a quick real life example if that's helpful.
Yeah,
my introverted intuition, I can find myself talking in abstractions and principles and, so much that sometimes I get a lot of questions when I teach, what does that actually look like?
Yeah. How do I do that? Right.
Right. How do I do that? Exactly. So, for example, if I have a friend who's struggling, let's say, maybe there's been a death in the family or they're struggling with depression. I will make myself available, but I'll make myself available, there are levels of need and crisis, right? But if we're talking about a daily sorrow or trouble that a friend is living with, I'll make myself available in a way that budgets my energy. So I'm not going to necessarily be available at the drop of a hat every time something is needed. That's where I think we also, as INFJs and extroverted feelers, need to really keep in mind we are not like the superhero model doesn't work in real life. People need communities. People need, more than one person tending to them. So I can look at my schedule and I can see that, maybe I've got a lot stacked up during the week and I'm going to need part of that weekend to be in solitude and connect with, the relationships that feed me as well. So how much time and when can I give to this person who I love and who I want to care for? And, I can only offer what I can give, and then they can decide what to do with that.
Oh, I love that. It's a great way to show up in the space that like honors the relationship, but honors a boundary that you have as well,
Yeah.
Love it.
And I too, and I think it's so often that when we deplete ourselves, when we've given too much, we've overfunctioned, we haven't set boundaries, that we start treating everyone as if, they're all the same. I'm going to not give any energy to any of you people, right?
Yes.
Right. It's like, you're all done, right? And because we're depleted and we haven't taken the time to kind of recharge ourselves. And I love that, because it is unstructured time where you allow your thoughts to just go. And people who don't need that do not understand there's a whole world going on in here, right?
Exactly.
I'm not just sitting in my pajamas watching TV. Okay. Right? There's a whole lot going on under the surface. And so, one thing that I do is if I find that someone keeps returning to me as the well, they're using, me to do for them. And I know I need to set some boundaries. I'll say yes to every other request. Because, and then that way I feel like I'm having a little more say in how things are going. And they're also learning that they need to be expanding their support system. I cannot be the only support system. And that's just one little hack that I use for myself. Do you have any other hacks, you or Cristine, that you would advise, a coaching client or, an INFJ friend or a therapy client?
For me, I actually have started in imploring the wait time. When I first get the request, I don't respond to it automatically in that moment. I give myself, okay, I'm not going to respond to any of these things until this evening when I know I've settled my day, I've had some of that alone time, and then I can kind of check in with myself. But that alone time, that's a real thing. Like I'm the same way. I need that every evening. And sometimes I do like, I'll play with clay or I'll just sit there and like, listen to music and like not do anything. But you're right. The wheels are just the whole mind body is just doing its thing. But I have to do wait time. And a lot of times it's tough because there will be kind of a lag in a response. And I know for some people, they're kind of like, hey, following up on this, but I can't respond right in that moment because I find myself really putting myself in a situation where I say yes because I'm overextended, or I say no out of the door slam, and I'm just saying no to everybody. And I don't really know if that's something I want to, is it a yes for me or is it a no? I don't really know. I can't feel or sense that in that moment. Yeah.
That's it. That's it. I love that. I think just delaying our response can be so powerful, because in the moment when the person reaches out to us, our first impulse, given that our feeling function is pointed outward toward others, is to want to meet that need, even if like our stomach is sinking at the same time, because
Yes,
we
right.
know that we are foreclosing on the time that we need for ourselves. So giving ourselves that break before response. And then I would add, again, checking in with the body, because I know for myself, when I'm about to overextend myself, my stomach's in knots, I feel tense. I feel like, I would say sadness, like a grief in my throat.
Yeah.
Because I know that I am just foreclosing on my own needs. I can feel that time that I need to restore myself slipping away. And so, none of us are perfect at this at all. There are still times when I overextend myself. But if I give myself that moment to check in with my body, it's like, oh, darn. I'm gonna have to set a boundary. My stomach's sinking. I'm feeling sad about that delicious, yummy time that I had saved for myself just going away.
Yeah. I think that is such a cool explanation of it, because it is a very somatic, emotional response that you have. And I kind of describe it as like, and I feel it like really heavy up here in the chest, because I want to receive, like give to myself. And I'm seeing myself just automatically drawn to give to somebody else. And it's like a sadness of like, I'm denying myself. Like I'm, there's a sense of this, like, I'm grieving the time, like I'm grieving not giving to myself. And, I love to do a lot of inner child work. And so I always like kind of imagine my little Cristine being like, no, come play with me,
Yeah, right.
That's a really cool way of like kind of checking in and being like, I feel sad because you're kind of just saying no to yourself if you go forward with it. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And we live in a world where not everyone needs as much solitude. They just don't.
That's
I
right.
see people out there, they're like, oh, I have 10 minutes on my calendar that's open. What should I put there? I'm like, nothing. Why would you put anything in there? And how do you only have 10 minutes?
Right.
And I run into people who really push back on my need for alone time. And the ones that I trust, I will try to explain. I really, this is something that I need. And I actually have this lovely person in my life who was like, I just don't understand. And I didn't respond immediately. I waited. And then the next day I reached out and said, I just want to delve deeper into this. And I said, and I realized you will never understand. And I will never understand that you don't need this. And
Beautiful.
that's okay. We just have to respect it.
Yes.
And and when I came to that realization that I can't convince someone that doesn't want to understand that my need is valid, right?
Yes.
Either they get it or they don't. And and if they don't, then they just need to respect it. Yeah.
It makes me think of something that Elaine Aron wrote, she being one of, or maybe the original pioneer of the field of high sensitivity. Of high sensitivity, she said, other people don't need to understand it, but they need to believe it. And I think that really applies to this INFJ need for solitude and time alone. Extroverts, other folks don't necessarily need to understand it. And I think that can trip us up as INFJs, because one of the gifts of our introverted intuition is the ability to shift perspectives and see things through other people's eyes. And sometimes we get stuck there, like we can't even feel that our needs are valid because we've shifted perspectives to this person who doesn't understand that need, and then it's like our needs become water in our hands. They just sort of slip through, and we can't even hold on to that sense of validity. So it's really important for us to remember other people don't need to understand the needs of introverted intuition. A lot of people can't, you know, just like we can't understand cognitive functions fully that we don't have.
Yeah.
But people need to believe us when we say, this is what I need.
I love that. Yeah.
That's beautifully put. Thank you, Joy. That was so beautifully put. I think that idea of perspective taking is so important. I know for myself, like I turn that, sphere every direction.
Yes.
And before I make decisions, and to some people, it may look like I'm indecisive, or that I, am, burning up daylight, really, right? Because but I like to look at it from every perspective. Now, I see that as one of my strengths, but also from what I also see it as one of my challenges, because like you said, if you get stuck in someone else's perspective, you will burn up daylight. Can you talk a little bit more about when we get stuck in that cognitive loop, basically, right? Is that what it is? How do we get out of that?
Yeah, great question. Let me sit with that for a minute. By the way, for any INFJs out there, when I say I need to sit with it for a minute, what I actually need is to disconnect from the conversation that extroverted feeling is facilitating. And I need to, what I call, take the elevator down into my introverted intuition, where I essentially step into like a perspective shifting machine or simulator, where I can look at the question or look at the issue from almost orbit around it from as many different perspectives as possible, and try out different ideas, running them past my intuition for resonance. So that's what I'm about to do.
That's such a
And I also, can we add to that you do it without thought?
That's right.
It's intuitive.
That's right.
You do it very quickly, right? Like it may quickly in the span of a time, right? I mean, depending on the situation. Is that accurate?
Right. I would say the speed depends on how many patterns I've already recognized in this area, how much time and reflection I've spent in this area of the question I've received. If it's been a lot, then I have a lot of patterns to be able to, sort of trace along to find the right one, to be able to take the elevator back up and be able to speak to it. If it's an area that I haven't done a lot of pattern recognizing in, that I haven't had spent a lot of time and reflection in, sometimes I need to get back to the person, like, let me sit with that.
Yeah.
Let me really, really do some deep thinking. And Lisa, I'm so sorry. That was my alarm. I apologize. That isn't even what I was sorry about. I apologize for my alarm going off. What I was going to say is that I have forgotten your question.
And I realized I did that to you as well.
I forgot it too.
What was the question? So how do you, what you said was so important and valuable for INFJs, I think, to recognize that it may feel like we just do this immediately, right? But there's actually a process. We're actually mentally processing, physically processing information. So thank you for sharing that. I think that's going to be very valuable to other INFJs out there. Okay. I really do. So I'm not even sure my question is that important. How do we not get stuck in the cognitive loop?
In your question, the cognitive loop is
when we get
I think
stuck
it was
from
other people, like all the different perspectives.
Oh, right. All the different perspectives. Okay, yes. So now I'm going to take the elevator down and reflect on that. Again, I think it has a lot to do. So there are different levels of perspective shifting we do. Um, we ourselves, without even thinking about it through anyone else's eyes or perspective, we ourselves usually contain multiple perspectives.
Mhm.
So we can think about it from this angle or through this lens or according to these concepts or according to that experience or this experience. And so we ourselves, just as individuals, hold multiple perspectives.
Mhm.
But at the same time that we're orbiting around the issue or the question from our own multiple perspectives, we're also orbiting around it, shifting from the perspective of maybe there's another person involved in the experience and we're trying to figure out how we feel or think about it. And so it's easy to get stuck, right, in the other person's perspective. I think what's really important here is to be able to acknowledge that's what's happening. And I think some signs that that's what's happening include what I was speaking to earlier about suddenly we don't even feel like our perspective is valid. We don't feel like our experience or our feelings or our needs are valid. That's when it's time to sort of intervene into that stuck place and say, no, wait a minute. What do I know about myself? What are the patterns I've recognized about myself? What are the patterns I've recognized about this issue? What is the learning I've done? And be able to acknowledge the other person's perspective without getting stuck into thinking it's the singular only perspective.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. I think that's very valuable because I call it when I'm chewing on an idea, like I'm chewing on it and I can't shake it. And, no matter, I can't distract myself from it. I keep returning to it. And typically it's when another person is involved.
Yes.
Because I can stepping into their shoes, seeing me from that perspective, and also recognizing, no, that doesn't feel right to me. Something feels off. And I go chewing. What are your thoughts on that?
So here is where it's important to note that introverted intuition, that pattern recognizing process, is what we call a perceiving process, which means it's an information processing function. So it's the way that we process experiences, information, learning. It's through that ability to shift perspectives, and out of those shifted perspectives start to recognize patterns. And we do that through internal reflection. But introverted intuition is not really going to help us land on a conclusion or a decision because it's always gathering more perspectives and more information. It's extroverted feeling that is what we call a judging or a decision-making function. It's the function that we use to evaluate the information that introverted intuition gives us. And it's extroverted feeling that goes, okay, I can see these multiple perspectives. I can see very clearly how this probably went down for this other person, this interaction or whatever it was. But I'm here to make sure that the decision-making process or the conclusion-forming process happens according to certain values. And those values include everyone's feelings are tended to and important, and everyone's needs are met, including mine. So it's actually extroverted feeling that I think can help us get unstuck from having gotten lodged into someone else's perspective and say, okay, but what are my feelings here? What are my needs here? I've done a good job of identifying what those are for the other person. What are mine? And how can we move forward in a way that, as much as possible, meets both needs?
I think that really kind of leads me into kind of a question that I feel like from a therapeutic perspective, and a lot of the conversations that we've had on the podcast before about the wounded ego versus, more towards the more secure, healed ego. INFJs, I feel like, are really kind of predisposed to, when we have some of that inner child wounding, you know, some of those core wounds, how that can really grapple with the giftedness of this type, you know, and lead us into some very, you know, dysfunctional codependency or overfunctioning, which, you know, we always struggle with anyway. But, you know, can you talk a little bit about how some of that you know, wounded ego phase of early life can kind of, impact the INFJ?
Absolutely. I think one of the core ego wounds that I see, that I experience myself and I see with the INFJs I work with, is that in most cases, we did not grow up in communities that were able to understand our internal processes. And therefore, no matter how loving they were, the way we tick was not necessarily validated, seen, or understood. So we can find ourselves growing up feeling as though we're just sort of wired incorrectly. You know, maybe we had a more extroverted family or members of the family. Maybe we had more sensing oriented members of the family who didn't understand why we couldn't just sort of, you know, wake up, get ready for school. I'm talking about myself now. Wake up, jump out of bed, get ready for school, you know, spend 6 hours at minimum around people, crowds of people constantly in classrooms, and then bounce back and like sail into our chores and, you know, just get stuff done and feel a sense of satisfaction for, you know, being a contributing member of the family.
Yes.
Like that's hellish for an INFJ.
Like hell.
Yes.
It sounds so simple, but it sounds so simple because we live in a world that's predominantly extroverted and predominantly sensing.
Yeah.
So this is the stuff that comes easily to extroverted sensors.
Yeah.
And like, thank goodness for them. Like, they're why society runs.
Exactly.
You know? But for us, you know, there's that ego wound often emerges from having our motivations and needs mislabeled as things like lazy or uncooperative or too sensitive, or you know, like we get our motivations labeled like we're just not trying.
Yeah.
Or we just don't want to cooperate, you know. And that's really damaging. It causes us to grow up with a sense of wrongness.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
And that we need to, the only way to be accepted and appreciated is to overextend ourselves.
Well, and also I think even just inherently not always being in tune with our own needs, you know, in those early, you know, neural pathways kind of being formed through the ego, being, you know, not attended to for our needs because there was something wrong with our needs. You know? And then in adulthood, if you haven't done that healing work, again, being in the space where you intuitively show up and tune into other people's needs, and having a belief that there's something wrong with your needs, like how that just puts you into kind of patterns of, you know, dysfunctional relationships and sense of self, that I think that this type and ego can be so closely, you know, intertwined in a healthy way and in a very unhealthy way as well.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh, that was so beautifully put. Thank you, Cristine and Joy. I love that interaction, and it was so insightful about we do have wounding, not from something that, you know, we've created, you know, we didn't go out seek it, but just, you know, how we interact with the world. You know, we are in the world, but not of the world, that feeling that we always have. And so we can heal that as adults. Now, I find for me, processing, like, you know, extroverted feeling, I have to verbally process. I have to get the words out of me. And that could be journaling, that could be, you know, talking to a trusted friend where I just kind of, you know, purge all the emotions out. And, luckily I have those wonderful people in my life. It could be a coach, a therapist, however you need to do it. But is that typical of an INFJ, that they have to get it out of them?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Our intuitive ability to find patterns and make connections and develop insight, that functions internally. But if we are going to engage our extroverted feeling function for ourselves, and be able to really evaluate the information that introverted intuition brings us, form conclusions about what we need, be able to process through what we feel, that really does happen externally. And like you said, journaling is an external means of processing, right? Being able to go to a therapist and just kind of like monologue. I think that's usually how therapy with INFJs goes, actually, is we show up, we monologue, and then we're ready to hear, insights, reflections, receive care. Because that process of being able to evaluate our experiences, the information that introverted intuition has processed, is an external one.
Well, even this conversation, I know for me, has like made my heart kind of sing, because it feels like an external like attendance to those parts of me, so that's a really cool concept that you brought up, Lisa, about needing that verbal externalizing of your feelings and stuff. I even felt that here, not even talking about my needs, but just connecting in an external way to that type that is who I am, so.
Love that.
Well, enjoy. So as we're finishing up, we're going to ask, so what is one piece of advice that you would love, if, one nugget that you want all INFJs to know out there?
Let me think about that for a minute. The way you're wired is valid. It may seem like you're always scrambling inside, coming up short, having to overextend yourself to function the way that other people expect or want you to. But in reality, what that does is it short circuits your natural strengths. It doesn't give you the space and time to be able to take the elevator down and connect with yourself. And I think the greatest gift that INFJs give to the world is our insight. And that's a direct result of the ability to take the elevator down, process, reflect, make connections. So giving yourself permission, first of all, I think learning more about your type, learning more about your cognitive functions and the way that they work together and what they need, what you need. And then secondly, giving yourself permission, even if no one else will, to start living in accordance with the way you're wired, is not only so necessary for your own ability to thrive, which is so important. You're not just here for others, but is also how you make a lasting contribution in this world.
Yeah.
That was so beautifully put. There's INFJs, the INFJs here, and then the INFJs that are going to hear this or watch this.
Yeah.
That is going to be very powerful for them. Because isn't that what we seek as INFJs, is to be understood?
Yes.
And for someone to see us as complete and whole, not flawed, not broken, not weird. That word, right?
I claim my weird.
Yeah. Me too. I've started to. I'm like, I don't care anymore. I don't care. If you like me, you like me. If you don't, you don't. I'm good. Yes.
That's right.
All right, Joy, we have so loved this conversation. We would love to have you back.
Back.
Yeah, I know that you mentioned that you're starting to maybe grow into a different area. When that's ready to go and you're ready to share, we would love to have offer this platform for
Thank
you to
you.
do that, to offer whatever service you're going to offer the world, because we know it's going to be amazing and it's going to be unique and someone's going to benefit.
That means so much. Thank you both for having me on. I felt like I was just chatting with friends. I feel invigorated. You're both really lovely people, and I'm thrilled to have been a part of this episode.
Thank you so much. Cristine, do you have anything to offer?
Oh, no, I mean, where can we find you, Joy? Where can the rest of the listeners and watchers find you, and how can we support you in your new endeavors and the work you've already done?
Thank you. Probably the best way right now is to hop onto my newsletter. You can find that form to complete on my website, joymalek.com. The place I'm most prolific is on Instagram, where I post daily messages for INFJs and highly sensitive people. Those would be the two places.
We'll also put all that information in the description, so that you can just click on there and hop on over to sign up for that newsletter, which I'm already signed up for and very excited. And I actually got my INFJ, help me out here.
Personality poster.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm so glad.
This I'll be like, yeah, I'm using my intuitive intuition here, introverted intuition. So and I'm gonna walk myself through it and remind myself to feel my sensory.
Yes, exactly.
It's always the reminder. It's like, yeah, we're supposed to be enjoying the pleasures of life.
Yeah,
that's
We're
right.
here for that reason. All right, Joy, thank you once again so much. Like, subscribe, everyone, and stay tuned. We're going to learn more about Joy. There you go, in the future. All right, thank you, Cristine. Thank you, Joy.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.